Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, July 8th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Michigan and the Republican frontrunner Ryan Kelly and the Republican Party practically being in shambles as we continue further and further into this GOP primary. Now, President Donald Trump has yet to endorse in this primary, which has made it very difficult for the GOP to have a clear and consistent frontrunner. And the reason why that is so important is because right now, their current frontrunner, Ryan Kelly, who leads on average by 4.8%, is currently in an investigation by the FBI and appeared in court the other day on January 6th charges. Now, that is something that you don't want associated with yourself as a candidate in a state that voted for Biden by 3 points in the 2020 presidential election. What I see from this is that Ryan Kelly and the Republican Party needs to really scramble and reevaluate whether or not, one, they want to be running him, or whether or not Ryan Kelly really wants this nomination, and two, who they can replace him with. Because they lost a lot of their contenders, and there's just been so much going down in the state of Michigan that it really is ultimately adding up to a very easy Democratic victory. Now, right now, Gretchen Whitmer has about a 91% chance at victory according to FiveThirtyEight. That's something that we never could have predicted, especially considering how close this race was in 2020 and how close it was expected to be in 2022. And looking at the Republican candidates here, there were candidates that are now disqualified that honestly would have had a very good chance at victory. Most notably, James Craig, the former chief of the police department in Detroit. He came in under this new narrative of being against defund the police, being against a lot of the social issues that the Democratic Party was for, and really trying to bring in this new perspective into the governor's race, something that the Republican Party hadn't really been able to hold on to after 2018. Now, he was disqualified, largely in part due to negligence by his own campaign, resulting in fraudulent signatures to get on the ballot. But when he was removed from the race, he was removed alongside 4 other Republicans, narrowing down the race to practical no-name candidates. So Ryan Kelly now being in court as the GOP frontrunner just simply doesn't help the Republican Party's case. Ryan Kelly is, in essence, cancer to the Republican Party in the state of Michigan because he only continues to drag them down. As I said, FiveThirtyEight gives Ryan Kelly a 9% chance of victory as the Republican nominee, whereas Gretchen Whitmer has a high advantage at 91%. This is very similar to where the Republican Party and the Democratic Party was in 2018, looking at the Michigan governor odds. Gretchen Whitmer had a very good chance of victory, largely because Republicans, Bill Schuette, that Republican, did not have the best candidate. It was also a blue wave year. But now that it is a red wave year and Whitmer still maintains this 91% chance of victory, it tells you a lot about the race. But this court procedure and this investigation really is just continuing to hinder the Republican Party's image across the state of Michigan. I mean, what we have been really expecting from Michigan is that they would prop up a candidate who was electable, someone who could win in a red wave year, and that wouldn't be super difficult. In fact, James Craig was probably that Republican before he messed up the primary. Looking at the hypothetical polling between any of these nominees, Gretchen Whitmer between Whitmer and the remaining 5 GOP candidates, Whitmer defeats them, sometimes by exceptionally large margins. Now, some people like to blame it on name recognition, but I can guarantee you name recognition does not reach 58, 57% in polls in terms of general election numbers. You may be recognized, but that doesn't mean that voters are going to immediately flock to you the same way they have been in poll after poll after poll with Whitmer versus these other Republicans. And if they were so upset and so pushed away from the Democratic Party, the fact that she's polling at a low point of 46, 50, then 57%, it tells you a lot about where the race is right now and how it's benefiting the Democratic Party. But as I mentioned with previous numbers, James Craig was the only candidate, and I say that very much confidently, the only candidate who was doing well in polls against Gretchen Whitmer. Even John James, a name that Republicans, Democrats, and independents in Michigan had known 2 elections in a row, ran for Senate in 2018, ran again in 2020, lost both elections, came very close, though, in 2020, outran President Trump, still lost the election, and still loses to Gretchen Whitmer. On the other hand, what you find from James Craig is that amongst the same group that rejects John James at the ballot, Gretchen Whitmer only gets about 38% of the vote against James Craig. Craig gets 45% and does very well against Whitmer. And in seemingly every other poll, it's either a tie, a narrow Whitmer lead, or a narrow Craig lead, which is pretty substantial considering that every other poll, and I kid you not about that, every other poll where Gretchen Whitmer is faced up against a real Republican, and I say real Republican because there were some polls that were warning signs, and I'm using air quotes right now, warning signs for the Democratic Party because of this generic ballot number. It doesn't really matter. This generic Republican doesn't exist. Generic Republicans, generic Democrats really only matter for national House forecasts and Senate forecasts. When it comes down to governor elections, is a lot more different because who the candidate is and who they are running against is extremely important, which is why Whitmer is maintaining such a significant lead. In fact, some of these rankings now have Michigan as likely D, lean D, tilt D. Looking at other states such as Pennsylvania or even Wisconsin, sometimes you even have flips for the GOP or you have very narrow leads for the Democrats, but in most cases, toss-ups. People and these political forecast companies are becoming a lot more confident in a Whitmer victory, largely because of candidates such as Ryan Kelly. But I really don't know if this court case is going to damage Ryan Kelly as much as we might think. Don't get me wrong. I think Whitmer will win the governor election, especially considering where Ryan Kelly is right now. But the problem for Ryan Kelly will be the general election once the primary actually occurs. You see, looking at the numbers in the Republican primary, they have gone technically back and forth, but really it's anybody's race. There is a frontrunner, Ryan Kelly being that frontrunner, but it's not extremely consistent enough that we can say, okay, definitively Ryan Kelly is on track to win. But if anything was to take away from Ryan Kelly being the potential nominee, I would have assumed it would be number one, being arrested by the FBI, and number two, this court case. But I was proven wrong on the first hand. Being arrested by the FBI actually seemed to narrowly improve Ryan Kelly's numbers following that announcement. It wasn't something that I think ultimately contributed to his electability in the Republican primary, but rather did not take away from him. Ryan Kelly was still able to maintain a narrow but still important lead amongst Michigan Republican primary voters despite being arrested by the FBI on January 6th charges. Keep in mind, the majority of Republicans believe that the election was rigged. And if Ryan Kelly was there at the insurrection, they might not necessarily see that as a bad thing. Not every Republican sees it as an insurrection. Even by standard definition, and just based off of what had happened, based off eyewitness accounts, based off what we had seen in the Capitol building, it was the first assault on the Capitol building in over 200 years. You didn't really see anyone storming the Capitol even after Donald Trump won the 2016 election. I mean, what had happened was very one-sided, and it did not look good for the GOP on the national level, but there, of course, are those within a party that believe so extremely within a party's values, or maybe whatever you want to call it, that they are going to applaud Ryan Kelly for doing so, and he seems to be embracing it. Even at a debate a few nights ago for the Michigan Republican primary, he said he has no regrets about January 6th, and seems to be very proud of what he did. But he's pleading not guilty, while simultaneously having all this evidence stacked against him to a point where he could actually be in jail by the time the November general election rolls around. But the primary occurs way before he would even be put into jail. The primary is set to occur in August, I believe. Let's go ahead and see when the actual date is. It says that, actually, it does not say when the Republican primary is. I'm going to go ahead and Google it really quickly. But my point is that the Republican primary in the state of Michigan could actually end up being way earlier than what we would even see in terms of a judge's ruling or whatever will be the result of this court case with Ryan Kelly, meaning that it is very possible, honestly speaking, likely that Ryan Kelly is punished after the primary has occurred, and he could very well be the GOP nominee for governor, which would just be obviously a very bad look for the Republican primary party. So August 2nd is the Republican primary in the state of Michigan. That's what we should be looking out for. That is in under a month, which means right now it's just a race to get Trump's endorsement and a race to build name recognition. Kelly certainly has that. He has the recognition in terms of news media coverage, and he isn't being propped up as much as you might think by Fox News or other networks such as One American News Network or Newsmax or whatever these conservative media sites are. But he's building that name recognition and that notability on his own. Not necessarily positive name recognition or positive notability, but he's doing it through these charges, and it's really exemplifying himself to the base that might honestly believe in what happened on January 6th, might believe that the election was rigged. In many of these races, it has become a five-way race, a multi-person race, which means the candidate who wins the primary only needs, in some cases, to win about more than a fourth or a fifth of the vote across the other candidates. Based off of the lead right now, Ryan Kelly has a 4.5% lead, which isn't something that I would say is the worst to think about. 4.5% when you're running against these other candidates means that typically speaking, the undecided and the other vote is going to distribute about equally, which means Ryan Kelly will ultimately be propped to the top. I think it could be a victory as narrow as this, but I think the victory would have to come with Ryan Kelly or another Republican winning about a fourth a fifth of the vote, more than a fifth of the vote for obvious reason, in order to actually clinch the nomination. Many people are betting on Tudor Dixon in this election, but I can't say that I see where they are coming from. Unless Donald Trump endorses her, it doesn't seem as if she is the most viable option. She might be tied in the most recent poll, but that doesn't mean that she has this overwhelming lead. And if you look at the political betting markets, you might automatically assume that she does. I would also direct your attention to that 91% number, but more so on the political betting market number, 77 cents, which means that it is expected in 77% of outcomes based off of what the money is saying that Gretchen Whitmer does win. 3 months ago, that number was at 52 cents, meaning that the increase and chance of victory for the Democrats have increased tremendously if we're reading it based off of the market. The Republicans even took a lead for a narrow period of time, but then everything started to crumble. Whitmer was the underdog 3 months ago, less than that even, down by 6 points across the entire political betting market. But now, she's up at 77 cents, and Republicans are down at 24 cents. From what was an expected higher chance of victory for the Republicans than the Democrats, now down to just a 1 in 4, less than 1 in 4 chance of victory, shows that something has dramatically changed against the GOP, and it's honestly not hard to see that happening. I would also bring up the 2018 numbers for the political betting market on Predicted, where we knew that Gretchen Whitmer was going to win. It was nearly a certainty, but some people were still holding out strong for the GOP because the polls were inaccurate in 2016, so they expected them to be inaccurate in 2018. They ultimately were wrong. Polls in the state of Michigan seemed to be very accurate in 2018 and ultimately predicted correctly that Gretchen Whitmer would win her governor's race by about 10 points. But if you look at the months leading into Election Day, Gretchen Whitmer was exactly where she is right now. On the 15th of August, 2018, a Democrat yes share was 75 cents. A Republican yes share was 32 cents. How does that happen? Well, it happens when the Democrats and the Republicans have a seemingly good chance at winning, but obviously the Democratic Party is favored. It means that an election is seemingly predetermined based off of the political betting markets. And that's exactly what we're starting to get into. In just 1 month's time, we could be exactly where we were in 2018, despite the national environment and the Michigan environment being tremendously different for the Democratic Party, which means that would ultimately be a significant loss for the GOP. If 2018 was to repeat itself, or according to FiveThirtyEight, the Democrats were to win in Michigan more than they did in 2018, it would add into this idea that the blue wall is being built back, the Democrats are doing better in states where they never should have expected it. This is a Biden plus 3 state. If a Democratic governor candidate was to win by 12, 13 points, that means the Republicans were absolutely decimated. It's not just a blue wave. It's not just a mediocre wave. It's not just an environment that is beneficial to the Democratic Party. Everything is stacked against the Democratic Party, and if they do this, they should be very happy about their results and very confident entering into 2024. This doesn't mean automatically Biden's going to win it. There are Republicans out there, including Trump, including DeSantis, that could win Michigan in 2024. But what I will say is that what I have seen thus far in the state of Michigan doesn't really surprise me. And I think that this really could be something that the Republican Party regrets. Their inability to field the right candidates, their inability to ensure their candidates get the right signatures. I mean, this is just such a significant mess up to a point where their previous frontrunner was disqualified, then the next highest candidate was disqualified. They go to the Supreme Court shuts them down, then a new frontrunner is established, and now that frontrunner is in court. Tell me this doesn't sound like something straight out of a movie. Because honestly speaking, I wouldn't be surprised if I was trying to break the fourth wall right now, talking to a producer about this Michigan governor's race. I'm trying to speak to whoever's watching this reality TV show or this movie that has been written so poorly for the GOP. But this is reality. It is a reality that they have an insurrectionist as their frontrunner. Just something to think about and something to take in. Now, I know someone's going to make a comment about that, me calling him an insurrectionist as something that labels an inherent bias. I would say that I don't like people who tend to go to the Capitol or would lead to something of that stature in terms of pushing away from a free and fair election. Maybe it's political to say that, maybe it's not. I don't think it is. I don't think it ever should have been. But of course, in American politics, almost everything is political. But I stand by what I said. So what we should expect for the governor election as of right now, I don't know who's going to win this nomination. But I can't tell you any of these candidates will have a very significant chance of victory. It will take a lot. It's not impossible. Republicans have done it in the past. They have turned around elections extremely quickly. Look at Glenn Youngkin in the state of Virginia. This far out from his election, he was down 7-8 points. Ultimately ended up winning by 2. But the major difference here is that amongst all of these remaining Republicans, none of them are as skilled or as eloquent speakers as Glenn Youngkin. They also just don't understand political strategy or political maneuvering the same way that Youngkin or other good Republicans in these types of campaigns are able to do. Youngkin was very timid on social issues, did not publicly label himself as someone who would go against abortion access and abortion rights across the states. He didn't speak on gay marriage. He didn't speak on President Trump. All he did was welcome the endorsement, but didn't even campaign with him. I can guarantee you every single one of these Republicans would openly campaign with President Trump. They would take positions that are unpopular across a Biden state, and they would lose themselves an otherwise easily winnable Republican election. Republican pickup, might I add. This could have been so easily won, but ultimately it will more than likely be lost, according to practically anyone you speak to, because of the Republican Party's own inability to nominate the right candidates or keep them in the race and ensure that they aren't getting fraudulent signatures. Everything circles back to the Republican Party. Whitmer was entirely vulnerable months ago, but I can't say the same is true now. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 governor election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.